Hi. So before we get into the really complex stuff where things start to get kind of even more confusing, I want to do a little bit of review of what we've learned so far. The first drawings that we did were all drawn in 1-point perspective. So remember, you were limited to vertical lines, horizontal lines, and lines that would lead to a central vanishing point. And the way we were drawing boxes, everything happened to line up perfectly on a grid. There was nothing that was turned a little bit one way or another. Everything was pretty formulaic. Then we moved on into 2-point perspective. So we've shifted our point of view to the corner of the objects. Everything still is running pretty much on a perfect grid, north and south, east and west, and we are seeing things from more or less the corner view of all those objects. But in real life, things get a lot more complicated than that. So you could be in a room and, some of the chairs might be turned a little bit or the desks might be turned a little bit compared to the angle of the walls. And so how do you deal with a situation like that? Or maybe you've got a door that's open just a crack, or it's open, not just 90 degrees, but it might be 72 degrees open. So today's lesson is going to help us get through some of these more complex situations so that you can make your drawings look even more realistic. So what we'll be doing today is we'll be drawing a basic room using one type of perspective, and we'll be putting objects in that room that are oriented using the other type of perspective. So I think in general, drawing the room in 1-point is a little bit easier for most students, and so we'll start with just rebuilding a room using the basic 1-point perspective with our central vanishing point. And then so in this example, actually, the pink box is drawn using the central vanishing point, which was 1-point perspective. And then all of the other boxes that are still white in this slide are using the right and the left vanishing point. So they are not using the central vanishing point at all. It's really important to understand that you can't mix them. You can't use the central one for one angle of the box and pick the right one for the other angles of the box. You're either only using the central vanishing point plus horizontals and verticals, or you're using only the right and left vanishing point with verticals, but you aren't leading anything to that central vanishing point if you're using the two right and left vanishing points. So it's really important not to get confused now that we're getting more points on our page. Where things get even more confusing is where things are all kind of 2-point, but at different degrees of angling. So I think for now I'm going to delay that for a little bit later in the talk, and we'll just turn off the slides and go to our demo camera, and I'll show you how we'll get started. So I want lots of room on the floor so that we can put boxes in our drawing later on, and we have plenty of room on the wall. So we're going to start with our back wall, and remember, we're going back to our original type of drawing, which is 1-point perspective, where we have a central vanishing point. So using your template here with your right and left vanishing points, we'll be sketching in our central horizon line, and let's put a central vanishing point. You can put it right dead center, or if you want to shift it off slightly just for a little variety, it could be a little bit off center. Remember to label that your CVP, central vanishing point. And to make sure we have lots of floor space, I'm going to draw a rectangle that encloses that vanishing point, but that gives us quite a bit of room to expand the drawing. So I'm going to give a little bit more space above the horizon line than there is below it, just so that our walls are not perfectly all 45-degree angles, the corners of our room. And then okay, so remember when we started 1-point, when we're inside the box, we're starting with the back plane of the box, and we're building all the foreshortened planes out towards us using the central vanishing point. So to keep things straight, I'm going to use green. This is a pretty dark green. Hopefully you can see the difference in the video. And to build the basic room, we're going to be using 1-point. So remember that 1-point limits us to vertical lines, horizontal lines, and lines that lead to that vanishing point. There can be no other kind of arbitrary angles unless it's something like our diagonal that we use to subdivide a plane, or it's an X to find the midpoint of the object. So from the central vanishing point through each one of the corners, we're going to extend the lines out away from the vanishing point towards the edges of the paper. All right, so that's kind of our basic room. We're a little closer to this left wall. That's why this angle seems so steep. If our vanishing point were right in the center, these would also be at a angle that's closer to a horizontal line. But I wanted to show you what happens when we shift our vanishing point to the right or left and not always have it dead center, how that can affect these angles. So to put a doorway in here, again, just to review, we've done this already before. Let's do a doorway. I don't think we've done a doorway that surrounds our vanishing point. If we have, we're going to do it again. So go ahead and you're using true horizontals and true verticals to sketch out your opening. And then to create the thickness of the walls, we're going to still use our green, 1-point perspective angles. And we're going to go from each of these 4 corners of the doorway in toward the central vanishing point. So in this situation, since we're actually in line with the whole of the doorway, we're going to be able to see both the sides of the wall and the part of the wall that's at the top of the door. If the door is shifted off to the right of the vanishing point, we're only going to see the right side of the doorway and the top, but we wouldn't see any of the left side of it. So that's what happens when you've got your vanishing point inside a window or inside a door. You actually see more surfaces. So using our green pencil, we're going to be drawing our guidelines in from each of those corners to the central vanishing point. We don't know how far to bring them in yet, but just get them heading in the right direction so then we can trim them up later. And then going back to true verticals and horizontals, you can decide how thick you want one of those sides to be. I don't think I drew this I didn't put it in there very straight. It's going to be off a little bit, but I'm just going to go across the top first, and wherever that meets those vanishing lines that I just drew, I'm going to bring a horizontal line straight down. So I'm going to square this up a little bit. It was a little bit crooked. So you may see a little more of one side than the other. That is perfectly to be expected. It's unusual that you would see the same amount of thickness on all 3 sides. So do not force it to be equal on all sides, or you're going to end up having these angles leading off to some other point besides the vanishing point. It's most important that it leads right to the vanishing point. So hopefully you can kind of see this. I'll add a little bit of shading so you can kind of imagine the plane changes here. That's the part above the doorway. And if we wanted to extend this room into that second room, we could just lengthen these walls into that opening now so that it appears to. So we've got 2 vanishing lines, and then we can just choose at whatever point we want that room to end. And at that point, we would finish off the floor in that second room by using a true horizontal line. And we could actually see the ceiling as well, since it's so far away from us. So a little tiny room in there, and it's up to you if you want to erase this line. If the flooring is all the same material, you can just get rid of that line. If you want it to feel like one room has a different kind of flooring, you can leave that line to separate the 2 different floor types. So let's figure out how to draw a box now. So anything that is attached to the walls that were drawn in 1-point perspective, that also has to be drawn in 1-point perspective. So if you have a poster on the wall, if you have a window that's cut into the wall, if you have a cabinet that's attached to the wall, if you have a couch that's slid up flat against the wall, all of those objects that are in alignment with the walls need to be drawn in the same type of perspective that you used when you drew the room. So in this case, we would be using our central vanishing point to draw any of those things. If we drew a skylight, any of those things, steps that attach to the wall have to be drawn in 1 point as well, if our room itself is drawn in 1-point perspective. But anything that's free floating, anything that's sitting out in the middle of the floor, anything that's hanging from a chain from the ceiling could be turned so that we're seeing it from a corner, and in that case we would be using our 2-point perspective vanishing points. So let's go ahead and we're going to end up drawing 3 or 4 boxes on the floor here eventually, so let's keep them fairly small, and we're going to construct a box using 1 point first, just so that, since that's fresh in our mind. And let's put it off to the side here a little bit, and a little bit closer to the back wall. All right, so back to it. Make sure this is... All right, so as we start to draw that second box for the first 1 point perspective box, I like to start with the front of the box so I have a good sense of where it may end up being on the floor. I'm going to keep it way up here, and I'm going to draw it pretty small. We may need to zoom in to see some of the details a little bit later, but you can choose a rectangle of any proportions you want. Just do your best to keep the verticals and the horizontals nice and square. We also want to make sure that the bottom of this box fits completely on the ground plane. So you wouldn't want to extend it way in here, or it would actually break through that wall. So we need to make sure that the footprint of it fits within the floor plane of our room. So I'm going to start extending back, just like we did when we first were learning perspective. We put a dot on all 4 corners, and we extended lines back to the central vanishing point. So this way, using my green, just help me color code it. And this would be hidden, but still, we're thinking about that part. And then once you've got kind of the starting foreshortening of that box, you can decide at what point you want to end that side plane. Wherever that happens, then we can go straight across with another horizontal until we hit this dotted vanishing line heading to the central vanishing point, and then at that point we just head straight up to this point. We can also come straight across here. So we've got all the landmarks that we need already to finish off this box. This is the back top edge of the box, and then to complete the hidden parts we'll just use dotted lines, kind of show where the box is sitting on the ground plane. We're going to add some flaps to these boxes to make them a little bit more interesting in a little bit here, but let's get the basics filled out first. So let's put a second box here. Now so far we've only used our 1 point perspective. Now I want you to temporarily forget about your central vanishing point, and we're going to be just using our right and left vanishing points. So let's also kind of keep this box so that it's not interfering with that box. So we'll put the footprint of it will be more of a diamond shape. We're going to have 2 diagonals leading to our left vanishing point and 2 that lead to our right vanishing point. So we'll put it fairly close to the other box, but not quite covering it. So we've got 2 leading that way, and then we'll have to have 2 leading this way. I'll start using my red pencil again. This can be my blue one. So that's the footprint of the box, and then from each of those 4 corners of that diamond shape we're going to extend the box up to help locate the top surface of the box as well. So here we're just using true verticals, and we'll just estimate how far up those need to go until we can bring in the vanishing lines that will help make it really accurate here. All right, so it'll be a shallow box as well, and then we'll go back and finish off the sides. We'll have to alternate, so I'll bring one to my right vanishing point, and then I'll switch so that I'll go from the same point and lead that off to my left vanishing point so that I know where the back corner is, so that I can then go from this point back to my right vanishing point. So you end up switching back and forth pretty frequently when you're doing these kind of constructions between the right and the left vanishing point. And I am kind of watching for this line. I know that's the back corner of my box, so that's where I'll stop my red line. And then I switch back again to my left vanishing point and my blue pencil to make the last side. So again, everything that's running north and south is blue, heading to the left vanishing point. Everything that's running kind of east and west is heading to my right vanishing point. And then now we get into some kind of interesting things. So what happens when we have another box that gets dropped on the floor there, and it's not quite turned at exactly the same angle as this one, but it's also not just laying square, you know, perpendicular to us. So what happens then is, I'm going to go back to the slides for a minute and show you in slides. So we've gone through these. Okay, so this is more of the situation that I'm talking about now. So you can see we're seeing all of the boxes more or less from the corner, but some we see a little more of the front plane, some are sort of half and half, and some we might see more of the left side of the box. So what happens is we've got a situation like this. The pink box is not following the right and left vanishing points anymore. It's still 2 points because it's not, I mean, you can tell that they're not using any horizontal lines to construct this. It's all converging lines and vertical lines. So we know it's 2 point or 3 point, but we've got to figure out what vanishing points they're using. So in the next slide, you can see that what happens is the white boxes are all using the same 2 vanishing points, but the pink box, the vanishing points remain the same distance apart, but they both shift. They both can shift to the right or they both can shift to the left, but you never just make them farther apart or closer together. They have to stay the same distance apart because that represents a 90-degree angle in real life. So you don't want to be playing around with changing those measurements. So as long as you shift your vanishing point the same distance in the same direction, you should be able to construct another 2-point box, but using new vanishing points. So I'm going to go back to our video and label this for you. So again, the white boxes are using the vanishing points that are circled in blue, and the pink box is using the 2 vanishing points that are circled in red. So they stay the same distance apart. They've just both shifted a couple inches in the same direction. So let's try that in our own drawing. Turn off the slideshow and turn on, there we go. Okay, so I don't have a lot of room here. Let's see if I can zoom out even more, show you a little bit more. Okay. So I'll leave my left vanishing point. Why don't we shift everything to the right so that we can see it on the camera. So let's make a new, this will be a second left vanishing point and a second right vanishing point. I'm going to maybe mark it as a red dot, and I want to go the same distance. So let's move it, let's say 3 inches. We're going to move them both 3 inches over. So this will be our new left vanishing point. I'm going to number it left vanishing point 2. And we'll go the same distance over from our right vanishing point. This will be our right vanishing point 2. So for the number 2 boxes, I'm going to be using this point and this point as our points that we're measuring from. And I ran out of colored pencils that I can use, but we'll go ahead and add a second box here. So I'll start with the front corner of the box as a vertical line. I think I'll just use black pencil for this one, so that, and notice I'm using my new left vanishing point for this. We're going to draw 2 lines heading to the new left vanishing point. We've shifted over to our new right vanishing point, and we'll be adding a few angles there. Okay. Messed up this one a little bit. Let me fix that. And we'll make this box a little bit different shape. Get it nice and square if possible. So from these new corners, we're going to crisscross. This one on the left side goes to our new right vanishing point, And also this one at the bottom on the left side needs to cross over to the right one. That would be a hidden line, so I'll draw it as a dotted line. And then from this corner and this corner, now we switch back over to our the second, or the left vanishing point number 2, until it hits this line, and that point helps us know exactly where that last side should be. And if we drew it fairly accurately, it should match with this one as well, so pretty close, not perfect. Get rid of any lines that are confusing things. And we have a box. So label for me, this will be VP's number 2. This will be VP's number 1. And I'll do left and right too, so we know it's not just, we're not using the central one at all. Left and right, VP's number 2, number 1. So the boxes are still 2-point, but they're slightly different. The next thing we're going to do is add some flaps. Now with boxes, if the flaps are just aiming flat out, so if they're continuing in a horizontal plane from the top of the box, we can use the same vanishing points that we used when we built the box itself. That's just sort of an extension of that same angle. But if the flaps are folded up, or if they're folded down, or if they're tucked in, we have to figure out where those vanishing points are shifting. So as the boxes were turned, we were actually shifting vanishing points left and right. But as the flaps are changing from a horizontal plane to an inclined plane, the vanishing points don't slide right and left on the horizon line, but the vanishing point, that's when we identify a slope vanishing point above or below our normal vanishing point. So let's go back to our 1-point box, and we'll draw some flaps on that. I think I'll zoom in on this one since we don't need to use the right and left vanishing points. And then as we get back into the right and left ones, I will have to zoom out again so you can kind of see a little bit more about which vanishing points I'm using for which parts of the drawing. Okay, that's probably all right. So for flaps on this box, let's try a few different variations. Let's make one flap that's just going straight up and down. So we already are using our verticals of the box, and we're just extending the flaps up from the base of the box itself. So it's really easy to add a flap. Let's all maybe add flaps in the same side just so that we can have kind of consistent results. So I'm going to add a flap as if it's on this side of the box. And if you think about a real size flap, often the flaps will meet kind of in the middle of the box. So if you want to estimate how big the flap should be, how tall it should be, you could just take this measurement because it's not a foreshortened distance. It's on a horizontal plane, so we can just use our pencil or whatever we want to measure, and we're just swinging that up vertically. So we're taking that same distance and we're just making it oriented upright instead of laying flat. So just extend that up about, again, you don't want the flap to be any bigger than halfway. It could be a little shorter. Some boxes have shorter flaps on 2 of the sides and then longer ones on the other ones. From the top of the flap, we're going to extend back to the same vanishing point we used when we built that box in the first place. So this was completely 1 point, so we're only going to worry about that one vanishing point. So we're extending that top flap across, and the flap is going to end right here. So we know that we're just extending that back corner of the box up. Now that this is a visible part of the box, we can draw it in as a solid line instead of a dotted line there. And then I would also like you to draw a little bit of thickness. So we're just going to double up these lines so that it feels like there's a little bit of thickness on the cardboard there. So it doesn't feel like it's made out of just a thin piece of paper, but it's actually got some width to it. So that's super simple. We've got a flap going straight up on that box. Let's do a flap that's coming straight out towards us. So that means we're attaching the flap from this edge of the box, and it's just going to be drawn in perspective, so it's going to appear to get larger because it's aiming out towards us, but it follows the same lines that the box itself followed. So just go back to your original construction lines of that box and extend those lines out. you can decide how far you want it to extend out, but really realize if that box had been closed, usually the two flaps meet right in the middle of the box. So I'm not going to make it super long. I'm going to just maybe make it, in fact, we could even use the X method to know exactly how far to take that if we wanted to take the time to draw an X in there. I'm just going to estimate for now. So because it's so foreshortened, it wouldn't stick out terribly far. I'm just going to make it, and I'll draw it as a double line here as well so that we kind of have the illusion of some thickness to that edge of the flap, and add a little thickness in perspective as well. Okay, so we've got a flap coming straight out towards us. We've got a flap extending straight up in the air. And in one-point perspective, we can also make a flap that seems to be going off at a little bit of an angle. We just need to keep the lines more or less parallel. So if we want this flap to be at a little bit of a, let's have it sloping downward a little bit, like it's slumping down toward the ground. So I think I'm going to try to make the flaps on the two opposite ends of the box be the same length, even though one is going to be turned and one is going to be straight up and down. So I'm going to use the same distance, and I'm just going to choose an angle to make that flap slope downward. So this is one exception where you don't have to necessarily be using a vanishing point. In 2-point we will, but in 1-point, because it's not very foreshortened, that plane of it is not moving away from us, we can just kind of arbitrarily pick whatever angle we want there. But from this point on, for the end of the flap, we do need to make sure it leads to our central vanishing point. So for this next part, make sure that you're lining up your central vanishing point to that bottom edge of the flap and extending it toward the central vanishing point. And then for this back edge, just do your best to keep the two opposite ends of the flap parallel to one another. So here, they should not be getting wider because it's 1-point perspective. And I'll erase some of the extra lines that would now be hidden. If you want to add a little shading to kind of explain how some of these planes are oriented, you could do that. And I would like you to draw the inside of the box, because we could see in there now that this flap is open. So this little line here is now a visible line, and you could add some shading there as well if you wanted to just kind of give each plane a little bit different value to help separate the vertical surface from the one that's coming out horizontally. Okay, so we've got a pretty simple 1-point perspective box. We could draw in the back flap. In fact, we could make the flap straight up and down. We could aim it toward the vanishing point. We could have it drooping down so that it's just out of our sight. Why don't we just have it go straight out horizontally? So we'll just extend at the same angle that that front flap extended out. We'll just take the back flap out at the same angle, and because it's so much further away, I'm just going to do my best to try to keep the relative proportions of height to width similar to what this front one is, so that the back flap doesn't look too large for being that far away from us. Okay, so pretty easy to get flaps on there, but it adds a lot of interest to our drawings. For this one now, we're back at 2-point perspective, so let's zoom back out so that you can see our vanishing points again. And just a minute. I need to go even smaller. Okay, there we go. I want you to be able to see a little bit of space above and below the vanishing points too, because we're going to be sliding our new measuring points for the sloping flaps up or down from our standard vanishing point. So let's just focus on this box. If you were to put flaps on this box, you would have to use our new shifted vanishing point. So we're not going to worry about this one right now. I mean, it's not much harder, but to avoid too much confusion in one demo, we'll just focus on this one. So we're back to our color coding. Here the flaps get a little bit more confusing because it's easy to follow the wrong vanishing points if you're not really paying attention. So I think thinking about the color coding is going to help. What also helps me is imagining, okay, if the flaps were just laying flat out in line with the box, which vanishing point would they be leading to? And then as they get bent up, I'm still using the same vanishing point, but I'm just shifting the new measuring point up or down from that original vanishing point. So I hope that makes sense to you. Let's go ahead and do one. Let's do one flap as if it's just going straight out like these were, so that we tackle the easy ones first, and then we'll do some that are trying to, some sloping down, some sloping up, so that you can kind of keep track of which ones need to go to which vanishing points. So let's add a flap on the back. Well, actually, let's bring the one, because I don't want to block the view, let's bring a flap out to the right of the box, and it needs to be oriented towards our left vanishing point. So if it were laying flat out on the box, it would be following the same angle that these blue lines are. So we'll draw those out using the blue, and then I'll draw a little double line there to make it seem like there's some thickness to it. And then at whatever point we feel like is a good spot for that corner, we can switch to our right vanishing point using our red pencil, and that would be the end of the flap, the end plane of the flap. So I'll draw that as a double line, so it's got a little bit of thickness there too. So we've got a flap just hanging straight out from the box. That's pretty easy to draw. Now let's draw the one that's on the opposite side, but instead of just going straight out, we're going to make it just at an angle. So it won't be absolutely straight up and down, but it's going to be sort of at a 45-degree angle, which means it's going to be leading. Normally it would be leading to this left vanishing point, but because we've flipped it up, we're going to be heading up here somewhere. So what we've done is we've kind of shifted the vanishing point for the flap. So I'll just write this flap number 1, maybe, and we'll number the flap so we can keep track of that. So I've got a new vanishing point. It has to be directly above the other one. You can't just pick an arbitrary spot or the perspective won't work out. But I'm using this new vanishing point, and it's going to just make the flap come up at a little bit different angle. It won't be quite as dramatic. In fact, I might go up a little higher so it's a little more obvious. Let's move it clear up to the very top instead. I'll put it there. Okay, can you see that? I can't tell. Yeah, so it's just to the, my picture is almost in the way here. I can shift myself over. Okay, there, you got a little more room there. In fact, I'll put myself over here. There we go. Okay, so you can see that point. And then that'll make the flap appear to be angled at a little bit more dramatic angle, so it's more obvious that we're using a new point for that. And I'll draw a second line there just to show a little bit of thickness. And we need to align the other edge as well, so now I'm using the bottom side of the ruler for that one so I can see what I'm doing. And then you choose one edge or the other, and we'll switch back to our regular vanishing point. So this one doesn't need to shift up or down because this line in real life is still a horizontal plane. It's not sloping upward. So for that part, we'll just keep our standard vanishing point where it is. Use our red pencil for that. Okay, so these, I'm going to just maybe actually draw that in so that we can remember that that goes to a special vanishing point. So I'll write flap number 1 VP, whereas the box itself goes to our regular VP. Alright, my handwriting is sloppy. What I wrote here is this leads to flap number 1, which is the directly over our left vanishing point. Great. And then let's put a flap on the other side. So normally if the flap were heading just straight out from the box, this one would be drawn in red. It would be leading to our right vanishing point. but let's make it angling downward, which means in order for it to angle downward, we've actually got to shift this one up. So it's a little bit complicated, but we'll put that one up at the very top here too. You could even go off the top of your paper and put a dot on a piece of tape or something that's clear off on the side of your, I could put a white dot or something clear up here and just keep track of that if I want the flap to go up at a even steeper angle. I just wanted to try to keep it on our paper so you could see it. So this will be flap number 2, and I'll label them on here too. Flap 1. Alright, so flap number 2. It still attaches here at that top edge of the box. We're using our red pencil to help remind us that we were using our right vanishing point for these angles, and make sure both of those seem to be heading toward that flap vanishing point. I'll draw those in lightly too, just so that we can remember how we got that weird angle. Alright, and then this end of it now is also not a sloped plane. To finish off this last part of the flap, we're just going back to our standard vanishing point, because again, that part, if you went up in real life to that box, that edge of the flap is still horizontal to the ground. It's not on an angle. It's only this part, that the red part is angling on this flap. So we're drawing this in using our blue pencil, showing it's leading to the standard blue vanishing point. And again, if you want to draw a double line to show the edge of the corrugated cardboard, that really helps make the drawings read a little bit more clearly. And then for the last one, let's just draw a flap straight up and down. That's going to be real easy. So we're just going to extend our pencil lines straight up and down, true verticals, estimate how long that flap might really be on the real box, and then the top of that needs to lead back to our original left vanishing point again. And if we saw some thickness to that flap, we would see it at this edge of the flap and a little bit at the top. We wanted to do a tiny little sliver at the top as well. So that's pretty sophisticated stuff. It's can get kind of confusing if you're not really focused on what you're doing. So try to watch the video carefully, rewind it if you had questions. There's also some information in the bonus handouts on the Canvas page that can help you learn a little bit more about shifting vanishing points for various parts of your drawing. Here I'm not going to be able to lighten those lines that were done in colored pencil very easily, but I will add a little shading over there to help show what is happening with that flap. So I'll put a little bit of cast shadow underneath that flap so we can hopefully see it as receiving more light than the box that's underneath there. With cross-hatching, it's kind of fun to just lay in really light lines close together. The closer you group them, the darker the shadows are going to feel. And I try to do, as much as I can, try to keep the hatching sort of like cross-contour lines that would be describing that plane of the box, so you can follow kind of in perspective if you want the hatching to look more convincing. But just a little bit of simple hatching can help separate some of those planes so that they read a little bit more clearly. And then you can always go in and strengthen lines by darkening your visible lines and erasing those hidden lines. in order to make the drawing really make a lot more sense to the viewer. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see these boxes a little bit more close up, and not sure how much they're going to let me zoom in here, but let's try that. And this is one that I will scan for you and post on the assignment page too, so you can do a little bit more analysis of some of the delicate line works that may not show up as well in the video, but hopefully this makes sense to you. If you have a question, I'm glad to meet with you over Zoom or something too and talk you through where exactly things are going, but hopefully the color coding will help you make sense of the 2-point box. That's the more confusing one. All right, good luck with this one.